I don't need to tell you that Obsession is a great movie. It being genuinely record-breaking speaks for itself. The acting is phenomenal, the story is unique, the cinematography is beautifully unsettling, and every element of the story feels perfectly crafted. There's no fat anywhere. This was one of the best and most uncomfortable theater experiences I've had in a long time. I loved it. I've seen a lot of shows and movies recently where it feels like there were too many things happening in all the wrong places. Like, the stories were wasting time on extra elements and not developing the main parts of the story well enough. My past 3 videos have been complaining about stories mismanaging their time or building things up without properly paying them off. So I was thrilled to watch a movie that excelled at setup and payoff and made every moment count. There was no moment wasted in the story, and that's especially telling because of how many long, lingering shots there were. Even the pauses and silences had purpose. So, what's going on here? The writers were making the most of the time they had by really making the story work for them. A lot of scenes and moments in the story were doing multiple things at the same time to further the plot, tone, characters, and themes. Sometimes I see a story that feels like it can only do one thing at a time. This scene is furthering the plot, this scene is furthering the characters, and this is a scene where they tell you about the theme. It creates very thin-feeling stories, but the way to have rich storytelling that's ripe for analysis and rewatches is to have singular elements doing multiple things at once. But how much can Obsession really pack into one scene? To break this down, let's look at one of the earliest and one of the most important scenes in the movie.
Sandy? Sandy? Sandy?
Devastating. I hate it. It's brilliant. What's happening here? First, the scene sets the tone for the movie. In Obsession, we open on Bear and Ian in the diner talking about Nikki and strategizing on ways for Bear to ask her out. If you didn't know better, this could be the first couple minutes of a coming-of-age or romance movie. It creates a very relatable, comfortable atmosphere, one we've probably seen before in a dozen other movies. Then, it hard cuts to the dead cat. Sandy's body takes up the whole screen and we just linger on the shot, being forced to look at this poor dead animal. As a cat owner, seeing Sandy's body was an immediate gut punch. My cat dying because I left something out and she got into it is one of my greatest fears. Immediately, the sense of security and levity set up by the previous scene was gone. It's also a good contrast to what we expect from protagonists. One of the most stereotypical acts of heroism in film, alongside helping old ladies across the road, is saving cats. Saving or helping animals is a classic, textbook way to quickly get your audience to like your main character. So much so that there's a craft book named after it. So having one of Bear's first actions be indirectly causing the death of his cat gives us a good snapshot of what's to come. He's our main character, but he's not a hero or even a good person. Next, the scene characterizes Bear. The longer the scene goes on, that initial feeling of dread continues because the longer we stay on the shot, the more details we realize. Like the sleeping pills on the ground in the midst of spilled cat food. This cat didn't just die of natural causes, and this happens to be a tragic and unlucky day for Bear. Sandy died because of a choice Bear made. Or, more accurately, Sandy died because of Bear's inaction. Bear didn't dispose of the medicine when his grandmother died. Then, Bear didn't bother to check that the pill bottle was secure before he left that day. Then, Bear didn't bother securing the cat food, making it so Sandy could accidentally eat the pills when she was trying to eat kibble. Or maybe he even forgot to feed Sandy, leading to her getting into the bag herself and eating the spilled food without paying attention to what might be mixed in. My cat won't even eat treats she doesn't like, much less strange medication, so how hungry must she have been to not notice what she was eating? We saw in the previous scene how Bear feels kind of frozen by indecision and anxiety, and how he's unable to gain the courage to do the things he wants to do. In that scene, it just came off as an understandable but awkward moment, something uncomfortable but harmless. Then, we cut to Sandy's body, and evidence of how Bear's inaction isn't just a quirk, it's destructive. This pattern of behavior has the potential to seriously hurt people. Bear's inability to take action and his tendency to take shortcuts is what causes everything we see in the movie, and that pattern of behavior is introduced here. His reaction to Sandy's death also gives us a good window into how he deals with adversity. Upon seeing Sandy's body, he's distraught, understandably so, but then he puts her body in a trash bag and just leaves her there in the house long enough for Nikki to do everything she does to it. Bear experiences real pain, but that pain doesn't translate into anything constructive. He doesn't use this as motivation to do better, he doesn't cope with his loss in a healthy way, instead he pushes it aside and uses his loss as a way to get sympathy from Nikki and to make a social interaction go smoother. His distress around Sandy's death is real, but it isn't enough to change anything for him, which sets up how, later on, even though his distress over Nikki's action is very real, it's not enough to motivate him to do the right thing. He can't do the hard thing and let her go. Sandy's death also sets up an opportunity to set up some character dynamics. We get a good idea of Ian and Bear's relationship from the opening scene, but there aren't a lot of opportunities to see his dynamic with Nikki and Sarah before everything blows up. So seeing how Nikki and Sarah react to Sandy's death helps set up those relationships and also helps contrast them. From Sarah's reaction, we get hints that she likes him, and Nikki's reaction both establishes what Bear said earlier about Nikki being there for him when his grandma died, and also contrasts her reaction to Sarah's. Sarah has a warmer, more emotional reaction and uses it as a way to initiate contact, showing that she's either more comfortable being affectionate with Bear than Nikki is, or that she's being affectionate with him because she has deeper feelings. If it's the former, it makes Nikki's later affection for Bear more unsettling. If it's the latter, it helps show which of these characters is actually romantically interested in Bear, which is a good setup for later events with Sarah, and also a good contrast to Nikki. And if both of these things are true, it's doubly interesting. Seeing the different ways Nikki and Sarah treat Bear while reacting to the same event gives us a good idea of where Bear stands with each of them before the wish. That status quo, especially for Nikki, is really important for the horror to land later on. And once again, we have Sandy to thank for that. Then, and probably most memorably, Sandy's death creates several opportunities for horrific moments. First, at the beginning of the wish, Sandy's death is part of the excuse Nikki makes as to why she wants to be close to Bear. Then, the next morning, there's the little altar she makes with Sandy's body, and then it finally escalates to Nikki making a sandwich out of Sandy. This slow escalation is great, and by using pre-established elements in the story instead of creating new ones, it doubles down on the dread. At least for me, and I imagine for many cat owners as well, realizing you're unexpectedly eating a cat would be unsettling or upsetting, and that's doubled down upon by knowing that it was 1, your own cat, and 2, been sitting in a trash bag for days at the very least. Every instance of Sandy coming up builds upon the initial horror of seeing her dead on the floor, and it gets worse every time she comes up. Also, in between each escalation, there's the fear and dread of, okay, what's coming next? When I saw that Bear left her in a trash bag, I was like, oh, okay, she's still around. What's gonna happen with her? And then after the altar, I was like, oh no, I didn't see him dispose of her. What's Nikki gonna do next? Yeah, it's great. Finally, probably the most impressive thing this does is foreshadow the ending. As soon as we saw that Bear had a bathroom cabinet full of pills, I knew the climax was going to have something to do with them. Then, when the shop owner said Nikki would be affected by the wish as long as you live, I knew that Bear was going to kill himself. And as soon as Bear mentioned having sleeping pills in his car when he was with Sarah, I locked in on the murder weapon. And I love that detail. It was really well built up that this would be the end of Bear's story, and it's fitting since he was forced to die in the same way that his first victim did. His inability to take action and take accountability led to Sandy accidentally overdosing, and that same pattern of inaction and failing to take accountability led to him having to die in the same way. Obsession uses one plot point to do 5 different things and tap into 5 different elements of storytelling. Like, that's crazy. One dead cat allowed for a bunch of different cool things to happen in the story. The story doesn't keep inventing new ways to create horror or to communicate information, it instead uses what's already there. Not only does this create a really tight script, it's able to build horror by escalating a few elements a couple times rather than creating new horrific elements for every scare. Like I said earlier, the building of dread and anticipation of what's coming next was really effective. After the past couple videos being about stories that generally disappointed me with half-baked ideas, it was really refreshing to see a movie that understood what it wanted to do and left no idea half-finished. Every element of Obsession was so intentional, and I hope the lesson writers and storytellers of all kind take from it is the power and impact of good craftsmanship. Obsession wasn't good because there was one or a handful of really good scares, it was good because all those elements worked together really beautifully. Thank you so much for watching. I am so grateful for every one of you that stuck around and left a comment, a like, or even just silently lurked and watched my videos. Shout out especially to my favorite comments from the last video. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.